Now, China has expressed hope for what it calls peaceful coexistence with the United States.
We will continue to approach and handle China-US relations based on the principles of mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and win-win cooperation.
Well, for more on this, we can join Rob McBride, who's live for us in the Chinese capital, Beijing. Morning, Rob, or is it good afternoon where you are now? Because the question really is all about Trump's talking about trade. I mean, he's all about trade. He's all about the issue of tariffs as well. I mean, how is Beijing going to react to this possible second Trump term to this US president, potentially? And can Beijing do business with Trump politically and economically?
Yeah, I mean, officially, the response from China has been characteristically conservative. As you heard there from the daily Ministry of Foreign Affairs briefing, the spokeswoman saying that this is the internal affair of the US, she says, but adding that China respects the choice of the American people. I think, though, in reality, there is a sense of unease here, even trepidation about the possibility of a second Trump administration, because people here, of course, remember very vividly what a first administration was like. It was something of a diplomatic roller coaster. At the start of it, it seemed very close relations between President Xi Jinping of China and Trump. They seemed to hit it off. That quickly deteriorated, as you remember, into a trade war, the introduction of tariffs. It was all compounded, of course, by the COVID pandemic. In reality, the current Biden-Harris administration has continued many of those tariffs on things like electric vehicles, solar panels, but there are real concerns here in China, given its weak economy, just what more Trump tariffs, Trump administration doubling down on those tariffs might mean for the state of the economy. There's also the question of the impact on the geopolitics in this part of the world. Now, for the past 4 years, the US has been building up its relations with traditional allies like South Korea, Japan, Philippines, also standing by very firmly Taiwan, all seen here from Beijing as a way of trying to counter China's growing influence at the Asia-Pacific region. Now, there is a question about what a new Trump administration would do to those traditional alliances, whether it would weaken those things. That might be good from China's perspective, but of course that does come with the unpredictability of what a new Trump administration might look like, and that for a country that is so averse to uncertainty and unpredictability such as China, that would be a very high price to pay.
Thanks very much, Rob. And of course, as I've been saying good morning to everybody, I forgot that in Beijing it's good evening to you. So we'll speak to you again very soon. Thank you. Well, it is a hello to Andy Mock. He's a senior research fellow at the Centre for China and Globalisation think tank and joins us from Beijing. Good evening, Andy. Good to see you again with us here on Al Jazeera. It's a fractious relationship, isn't it, with Beijing, much of which revolves around trade, which we just talked about. Are we in for much of the same? What's your opinion, or will there be sort of a new reset button should Trump return as the president?
Well, I think certainly you're right, Sahil. I mean, this has been a challenging bilateral relationship. But I think that from Beijing's perspective, there are no surprises here. As we just heard, the tariffs were implemented during the first Trump administration, continued under Biden. There's no expectation that there will be a directional change in the trade relationship. So I think to the degree that less uncertainty is better, this is a positive. And I think Chinese companies have also adapted by working with third countries, whether that's Vietnam or Mexico. So again, no surprises here on the downside. Now, what I think is very interesting is that there's a lot of pessimism, as we've heard, trepidation even. But at the same time, I think there's also some optimism. And that's because Trump has shown himself to be a realist and a pragmatist. So versus someone that is pursuing rigid dogma ideology. And this makes it possible, I think, to do business with him, where there's clear, tangible benefit either to the United States or perhaps to his own interest.
Andy, can I just jump in there? Sorry, Andy, because it links to really this next bit of the question, because you've already talked about sort of the strategic partnerships. And yes, there are the economic strategic partnerships, but there are also recently under the Biden administration agreements with South Korea, Japan to counter North Korea, and then with Taiwan to counter China. You've touched on all of those, and so did Rob just a few moments ago, our correspondent in Beijing. Will these issues of Asia-Pacific in general be one that he sort of wants to put to bed? Because he's talking about sort of no more conflicts. Let's try and enrich all of us together and make it a more prosperous region.
Win-win, Sahil. Yes, I think you're right for a couple of reasons. So first of all, I think President Trump's priorities will be largely domestic. So the illegal immigration, law and order, reducing inflation. So I think that's the first point. The second is that, as I mentioned, he's a realist and a pragmatist. And when you look at the balance of power in this part of the world, I saw a statistic that I think China has something like 200 times the shipbuilding capacity of the United States. That Trump, I think, recognizes that any sort of escalation of conflict in this part of the world involving China will be a losing proposition. And the danger from a Biden administration or a Harris administration is because of the rigid dogma that even if they recognize the realities, they will still pursue a dangerously misguided approach. And there's the hope that Trump, again, as a pragmatist and a realist, will pursue policies based on reality.
There is one interesting scenario and dynamic that perhaps we do need to look at. That was that famous handshake between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un of North Korea. Now, we have been reporting in the past few weeks that North Korean troops are heading to Ukraine to join their Russian counterparts on the front lines. And yet we know that Trump has perhaps a line of communication with Putin, and he certainly does know Kim Jong-un. Do you think he's going to try and find a way to settle this issue as well?
I certainly hope so. I mean, it's in everyone's interest, and this is China's long-standing position, that disputes should be settled through consultation, mutual respect versus the use of force. So certainly, I think that to the degree President Trump can use his personal relationships to solve these conflicts, I think that certainly would be a very valuable thing. And the other thing, too, is that we need to point out that some of the fears on the Democratic side that there will be no guardrails, quote unquote, guardrails in place. One way we can understand this was that Trump in his first administration was kept from pursuing things, again, that were non-dogmatic, non-ideological, for instance, the outreach to the DPRK, that may very well lead to some surprisingly positive outcomes. Again, we need to recognize that unpredictability of risk means a greater risk of bad things happening, but it can also lead to unexpected good things happening as well. So that's a more optimistic take.
Certainly one to watch. And as I say, you know, he hasn't yet been confirmed as the president-elect, so we still have, I think, some very nervous hours ahead globally. But for the moment, Andy Mock, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Sahil.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.